Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another message from Fountain Springs Church. My name is Kevin, and I'm on staff at FSC. I'm glad you're joining not just me, but our in-person and online locations worshiping God together. Today, we are going to hear last week's message from one of our pastors, and spoiler alert, it's been shortened a bit to be broadcasted here on your screen. If you want to listen to the whole message, go to our website at messages.fs.church to listen to it all. Again, we are glad you're joining us.
I hope it's going well for you so far. Is it? Obviously not. What I want to do today, and I mean this with all my heart, is that we could go into the Christmas story and not just learn about the Christmas story. I think your life is in the story. And I think you and I can say, you know what, this is more than just history that's being told that's accurate and awesome and amazing, but that you and I can say, and that really means a lot to me because it applies to my life. So I'm going to do that. So if you'd like to look ahead or get to where I'm going to read, I'm going to be in Luke chapter 2, the classic version of the Christmas story that we often force or let our kids learn right before they open up presents, right? That kind of stuff. So I hope if you want to, you go there. Yes, I will show it later. But to get there, I need to set the stage, and this might seem weird because you and I think Christmas story, your mind might go to nativity scene, your mind might go Christmas story, Christmas shopping, oh no, I'm not done. Wherever, I want to set the stage because the Christmas story, for you to understand how big of a deal what happened is, like, you got to know what was going on. So I need to talk to you about fear. Classic fear. So begin to do a bit of a self-assessment on whether or not how afraid you are right now. Martin Niemöller. Let me tell you a little bit about Martin. If you don't know your history, this is a pastor who he got in trouble for majorly opposing Hitler. If you want to think of time frame, when was this guy? But what's interesting is the detail about as Hitler was going, and Martin found himself in the same room with Hitler, which would not knowing how everything's going to play out, not knowing all. So he listens to Hitler basically do a bit of a speech, and he's in the back of the room, Martin is. He's just observing, he's watching, and this is kind of first kind of experience with Hitler. I know you and I know all the details, but he doesn't know all the details yet about Hitler. So he's just learning about this guy who's gotten quite a bit of a following and doing a whole lot of stuff. And he's learning and learning and listening and learning. And so he gets done. He goes home and has the classic conversation with his spouse. She says, so what did you learn? And I'll quote, I discovered that Hitler is a terribly frightened man. It's interesting as we learn about fear. Let's talk more. Let's peel back fear. Max Lucado, well-known author, pastor. Fear turns us into control freaks. Some of us just think that's a personality trait. It is not. It is not a quality to own. Fear at its center is a perceived loss of control. The more insecure we feel, the meaner we become. We growl and bare our fangs. Mostly when you drive, okay? Just giving you some context. Why? Because we're bad, in part, but also because we feel cornered. I want you thinking about fear, and I want you thinking about in real terms, like the terms you feel. And the terms you feel are not necessarily the word fear, but you understand when I say you feel cornered, most of us are like, oh yeah. When all of a sudden you don't have an answer for a question you're asking, and fear comes in, it's usually because you feel absolutely lacking control, cornered, opposition is in your face, uncertainty is in your face. And fear, well, can be a monster, can it not be? And do you know that fear is used against you and I? I know you know that. If you were to study how the news works, sorry for those of you, the tagline here, if it bleeds, it leads, that is actually terminology as we've studied the news spectrum there, like going, okay, what are you doing? Why are you reporting on this? Why did you choose this story over this story? Why didn't you say this good thing? Why did you leverage the bad thing? What we know is they will use your fears and my fears to keep you connected. In fact, there's a strategy. If you're involved in the news, you're going to hate me. I'm sorry. But anyways, usually there's a teaser of sorts, going like showing you something or telling you something. But then it's followed up with, and if you watch the story, you will learn basically how to deal with your fear that we just got you afraid of. Classic line. Let me give you an example of, if I was a news person, I might say, do you know what's in your tap water? And I would just leave you there. And some of you would be like, I thought I did, but now I don't. And so what are you going to do? Even if you don't want to, you're going to like, well, nowadays, well, I'll go back to that story and find out. But I'm saying, you see what, and it gets you hooked in, and it's a hook of fear. What is fear doing to you? Now, don't answer out loud because it's doing a mixture of different things. You need to know this because different fears do different things. But right now, you should be processing as we go into Christmas, perhaps fear is affecting your job, your family, your spouse, your kids. It might be affecting how you see the future. It definitely could be affecting how you sleep or don't sleep. It could be affecting not just like, hey, are you smiling? But even deeper than that, that fear might now, right now, be making choices for you on your behalf, and you don't like the choices being made. Fear. I think fear has been a battle for a long time. And that's why I told you to go to Luke 2, because I think in Luke 2 it gets brought up and it's not just situational, circumstantial. Let me take you Luke 2. I'm going to read you something that you're like, I've heard that before. They're in my nativity scene. Okay, here we go. That night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Okay, it's their job. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared among them, and the radiance of the Lord's glory surrounded them. They were terrified. Now, logic says, of course they were. If you're in the middle of the night and you're outside and all of a sudden, angels, and they're talking to you, you're not going to be like, I'm so glad you guys showed up. I was waiting for, no, you're going to be terrified in the moment. It's logical. But if you understand all the words and what gets said by them, they're not just speaking to the circumstances of that very moment. They're not just giving words of going, settle down, guys. We got information. It's actually what most theologians believe. They're using language that applied to that moment, but also that applies to you and I right now. Here, they were revealing and saying the primary enemy of joy is fear, and they knew it. They were about to deliver news that people should be joyful. This would be a good thing. But notice they deal with the terrified guys at first. Think about why. Why say, don't be scared? Why not just say, I got good news? Like, why not start with just, here's the good stuff. Notice that angels immediately begin to link the fear and the joy. You and I don't do this. We have a tendency to say, I don't feel joy, so I must be unhappy. That's how we think that's the opposite. I don't have joy, so I should fake it more and smile more and think more positive things, right? And I don't think that's a good opposite of joy. I think a good example of the opposite of joy is fear. If you don't have joy right now, if you're like, I want it, and I'm not talking about if you want it, I should have it. I'm not saying if you should have it. I'm saying if you don't have it, if you don't live life with it, potentially, your problem isn't exclusively with joy. Your problem might be bigger with fear. To where if you want to have joy, you should say, what am I afraid of? What has me that I'm afraid of? Fear is rampant in the Christmas story. Let's walk through it. I made a short list. There's a longer list, but I made a short list. The Roman oppression that was going on. If you don't know the details, the Romans were in charge not because everyone wanted them to be. They just took charge. You could study it. You did in school. You may have forgotten about it. But they were brilliant at oppressing people, squashing people out, taxing people, scaring people. And if you lived under their control, you have to admit that there was a sense of fear that what if they were to exert more control? During the Christmas story, you've got major oppression going on. Mary's in her final trimester. What you and I often skirt over is we have a pregnant woman at some stage in her pregnancy, taking a trip that's been forced upon her. You can blame the government, or maybe she said, why am I marrying this guy? We wouldn't have had to move so far. But I'm just saying, we have to be willing to admit that that's not something that's so beautiful. I know in our nativity scenes, there's the stories that we tell the kids. You have to believe, because I know enough about this, I think she had some fears about the trip. I think there were some like, how's this go? What if things happen early on the trip? See, we don't think about that. You're like, well, go to urgent care. They didn't have that. Like, it was just like, yeah. With that in mind, we've got a barnyard birth. I don't hear about that either. Going, what, you guys excited about your kid? Yeah, we're looking for a barn. We're looking for a barn to really just. No, I know people like to get married in barns now, but we don't do the actual birth stuff there. Typically, we want it clean and sanitary. You have to admit that if you're giving birth around animals and stuff, that everyone there has a bit of an uncertainty about going on in their minds, going, I hope this is safe and I hope this is okay and I hope the goat stays away. And but think about, it's not so beautiful and picturesque like you and I have a tendency to think about it. It's gross, it's dirty, and with that comes, is this gonna work right? Is this gonna be okay? You gotta admit that it's there. The main visitors, complete strangers. Think about strangers coming up to your kid. This is even in the Bible, like, give me your kid. And that would be awkward. Some of you be like, that wouldn't have happened, right? Think about the people arriving to see Jesus. Think about the shepherds arriving. They were considered the bad people of society, and they showed up. That might get the family talking a little bit. I think some fear was there. And then some of the most obvious stuff about the fear, the Magi were afraid of Herod, right? They go to the king, and they tell the crazy king, asking questions to the crazy king, hey, where's the new king? Things I would not have brought to his attention, but they have to escape town. Fear. Joseph, Mary, and Jesus fleeing. Sometimes we don't read that part when we're opening up our presents, but it's there just so you know, where it talks about they have to flee the country, create a new family, and run. Can you imagine? A massacre ordered. You heard about that in the first message of this series, where a horrible massacre ordered. Like, think about the fear. If you had a 2-year-old or younger boy in your house, what would you be thinking? When you're afraid, you're desperate for good news. I know it seems simple, but listen to me. When you are afraid, when all of a sudden you're like, you have these unanswered questions or this unresolved situation, or you don't know how other people are going to handle, or your kids have now moved out, or all that kind of stuff. You're like, what do I do? What do I do? You're hoping for, you're desperate for some bit of good news to be a bit of an ointment for your fear so it will subside a bit. You want more details. Let me tell you a research project that has the potential to ruin a friendship. You want to hear what this is? I mean, this could ruin potentially even a marriage. I don't know, but listen. There's a research project done by the University of California. They gathered 800 people, and they gave each of the 800 people 3 short stories to read. So far, you're like, what's so problematic about that? Oh, listen. In the 3 stories, some of the stories had spoilers as you would read through the story. So it was like watching a movie that you have to watch the whole way through to figure it out, or watching a Hallmark movie. They're going to get together, you know that, right? Right? So you know the difference. So they put spoilers in some of the stories, and the other ones, they just let it play out to where your emotions were up and down, and you didn't know until the very end. And what they did, the point of the project was, at the end, they asked the people, the 800 people, which stories did you prefer and why? And this is where we lose friendships. Because here's the assessment. Subjects significantly preferred spoiled over unspoiled stories. If you've ever had someone ruin a movie for you, you know what I'm talking about. Now, like I told you, this can split a friendship because some of you are like, no, I don't want anyone to ruin it. Listen, you actually do. Because if you make it personal, if the movie's no longer a movie, but it's a story about you, knowing what happens later affects how we see now. With that in context, I believe that's what the angels did. They spoiled the story, but they didn't spoil it. They made it good. Here, Luke chapter 2. In the midst of dealing with some freaked out shepherds, don't be terrified. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. Do you know what they just did? Don't be terrified. You're afraid. All these people are afraid. What you guys are going through it's terrible. It's tragic. Don't be afraid. There is a Messiah, a Savior. That's the end of the story. I don't mean to ruin Christmas for you, but when Jesus is born as a baby, put into a feeding trough, he's not done anything yet. That's what some of us have wrestled with Christmas. You're like, what's the big deal with Christmas? You got to wait to do your thing. Well, the beauty of the angels know this, and they're saying, we know there's fear, we know there's oppression, we know that there's horrible things going on now and in the future. Here's the end of the story. The Savior's here. The end of the story has arrived. He's dealing with, think about when you're thinking about your fears and what you're going through, you're thinking about not the end of the story, you're thinking about now you get consumed by it. Look what the angels did. But then they add to it, Lord. The word Lord it's interesting because the way Luke writes, if you were to study the book of Luke, you're going to learn that in the book of Luke, he likes to use the word Lord more than others. That seems to be what, like when he thinks about him, I want to call him Lord. And you're like, yeah, there's been history where Lord meant you're in charge of an area of land. If you get into the weeds here, Lord, the holy, unspeakable name of God himself. So when Luke brings up Lord, when the angels bring up Lord, they're not just saying Savior, Messiah, good guy, gonna be a rabbi. This is awesome. Speaking about God. Now, who's this for? Luke 2:10. That's important to see. All the peoples, all of them. Who's he coming for? God is showing up for everybody. So let me use my personal commentary, the David Canaan commentary. Here's what they're saying. Hey, shepherds, God just showed up. It's the spoiler that they needed for their fears. Whether you think you can fix it or not, or someone else can. My guess is it's difficult for you to remember the end of the story, that there will be a day if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, no matter if your sickness takes you or the relationship dissolves or you lose all your money, your job, your security, your house, if you lose it all, no matter what happens, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, the end of the story is the Messiah came for you and resolved your sin problem. And I know I'm not trying to pacify or disregard your current pain. But in the midst of our pains and our fears, we have a tendency to get caught up in them and forget the end of the story is stinking awesome. And there will be a day that you do not experience pain or uncertainty. There will be a day that you are thriving no matter what's going on. You need to remember that. So what do we do with this? Well, pretend, smile, and leave church and be like, it was about joy. Try not to be afraid. No, that's not, no. Here, how do I fight fear? How do I fight fear and keep joy? How do I do both? I'm not good at multitasking at all, not one bit. But I think that you and I at the same time can hold on to our joy and fight fear. I think we can do it at the same time. The evidence I have is in Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. I think this is a script. I think this is help for you and I, that if you've ever wanted to be like me, I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in the church, 4th generation pastor in a row. And what has always been distasteful in my heart is faking being a Christian. Like faking this stuff, going, I'm supposed to have joy, peace, patience, all that. Oh, I'm just going to fake it until I get it. If you don't want to fake it, then listen to what this is saying. I'm going to pick it apart and plug it into your life. And from that, you'll be able to fight fear and hold on to joy at the same time. Let's pick this apart. Such a great cloud of witnesses. This is note-taking time, by the way. If you want to have joy, pay attention to what you're doing around you and who's been doing it. Here, others have faced obstacles and they've triumphed. What you're going through, what you're afraid of right now, there is history that tells us people have been through what you are going through. I know that's not politically correct. You're like, no, I know I'm supposed to tell you what you're going through is so unique. Just to you. No other generation has ever faced what you're facing. That's a junk. What you're going through matters. It's a big deal. But others have gone through difficult as well, and they have triumphed. And our society wants you to forget that. You need to remember that what you're going through is bad, but it's beatable. You got a reminder, you know where there's a bunch of triumph stories? The B-I-B-L-E. The Bible. It's full of them. It's full of people on display doing their worst moments, written in paper, put into the best-selling book ever that you and I get to enjoy. Their triumphs, they're overcoming amazingly difficult things. That's why the Christmas story is full of people worshiping, celebrating God, being about God. It's why you and I love the nativity scene, because of what it represents. But don't forget, it's full of triumph. Joseph, Mary, the Magi, the shepherds, Jesus himself. It's full of triumph. So the question is, like, what's getting more playtime in your mind? The bad stories or the triumph stories? If you want joy, remember there's a cloud of witnesses. There's a cloud of people. There's a group of people that have triumphed, and you need to work hard on remembering those. Let's pick it apart more. Throw off everything that hinders. It's likely that you've got things hindering you right now that aren't like purposeful or fully intentional. They're just around you. Our affections are often where we're tempted to get this most. Control. Your craving for control right now could be hindering you, and your boss wishes they knew you were having this conversation right now. Perhaps your spouse hopes you're listening right now. Maybe your kids wish you were listening right now. Do you see what control does to you and I? It fills us with fear. To where we tell our kids, hey, why don't you stay home for the rest of your lives because it's safer? You'll change that opinion. Value. Value, if you don't know your sense of value, that will hinder you. That will get you all caught up to where you will try to find value in your job and money and people liking you. And you'll be so fearful that you won't have joy. Security. Oh, I love to preach about security. I don't think safety is first. I don't think it should be our first priority. But in our society, it tends to be, which makes us fear-driven. Pleasure. You don't need me to preach about that. You already know about that. How we get so caught up in seeking pleasure that we find out we're fearful for some reason and we've lost our joy. Is your version of life on earth robbing you of joy on earth? Is your version of what you think life should be like right now and what it should feel like, be like, who should be around you, being consumed by that, has that taken your joy away because it's not that? You should evaluate that. Let's pick this apart. One last part, the easy one though, the obvious one, sin that so easily entangles. We talk about this a lot. Entangles, the word meaning actually surrounds. This is purposeful disregarding of God. If you've ever found yourself living a lifestyle where like you know about God and you know what he might say about it, but you disregard, you don't go to God for any solutions, wisdom, any kind of guidance, you just disregard him, you do your own thing. It's a hard place to find joy. What and who are you surrounding yourself with will give you answers to your amount of fear, your amount of joy. Let me go back and finish the Hebrews. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Now watch what it gets described. For the joy set before him. Sounds like he's going to have a great day. He endured the cross. In the context we've talked about, with fear and joy on the table. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Apparently, the example of Jesus tells us you can have joy at the same time while you fight things that you're afraid of. The short of it, your best source for joy is Jesus. That's why I love the Christmas story, because it reminds us of things that I think are so powerfully significant. What are you afraid of? This Christmas, as you stare at a nativity scene, I hope one of the annoying things that will happen to you now is that you look at the nativity scene, you'll be reminded of the things that they were afraid of. And you'll ask yourself, what are my fears doing to me? Now, perhaps you're not exactly just there. You're like, you know what, David, I'm pretty good with fear and joy. Well, if you still have this deficiency of joy and it's not about fear, let's keep walking. John 15 gives us more joy and fear talk. I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy. Now, you may not remember that part, but you probably do this. Yes, your joys will overflow. This is my commandment. Love each other the same way I've loved you. You're like, oh, I remember that part. Love others the way that I have loved you. I think I want to really dial the sermon in right now. If you don't want to fake joy, I think you be less consumed with your own circumstances, listen, and pay attention to the circumstances of other people. And I think that is the momentum that your joy needs. I'm not saying ignore what's going on in your life. Please don't do that. But don't be so consumed by what's going on in your life that you forget what else is going on in other people's lives, where perhaps you are the answer to prayer that they are praying.
We're so glad you tuned in today. Fountain Springs Church is located in the Black Hills of South Dakota, but our community reaches beyond our neighborhoods and spreads around the whole world. Our website is a great way to give, get involved, and get connected. If you appreciate our ministry and want to be part of our mission to show people who Jesus is, here's what I'd recommend. Join us financially. When you do that, you're giving other people the opportunity to hear what you just heard. So here's a way to do that. Visit our website at fs.church/give. And thank you so much for being with us today. And let's do our best this week to show people who Jesus is.